Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Metroid Other M. In the last where we started off the Cryosphere after finishing off our business in the Pyrosphere for now. And now we gotta take care of more of these things. Again, I would recommend using missiles where you can with these guys because A, it keeps them from doing that attack which really hurts. But it also just keeps them at a distance long enough that you can take care of their invincible phase without having to worry about much. Although again, later on in the game when we get more beams, this phase will become less of a problem. And I think they can just run a timer out on the invincibility phase on their own. It's just that that'll take so long, you might as well shoot a missile at them anyway. It's not like you have a shortage of them in this game, honestly. It's weird. I think this game has either the lowest or second lowest missile total you can have in the series, outside of maybe Prime Hunters, because I know Prime Hunters had 90. I forget how many this had off the top of my head, because I haven't edited that part of the footage yet. But you don't really feel the shortage of them. Because, A, you can regenerate them at any time. Even if concentration requires you to stop for a second, it's very quick. And B, they do so much damage that it's worth using them at any point in time. If anything, I'll give them that. It's easily some of the most useful missiles in the series. In that regard, that's an ice wall. Well, I guess we're going backwards. Not the first time in a Metroid game. Not by a long shot, even.
The most efficient way through here should be delivering shoulder impacts with your speed booster, so I'm authorizing its use.
The only 3D appearance of the speed booster thus far. With that said, it works exactly like it did in Fusion in Zero Mission. You move forward in a direction long enough, Samus will build up speed before eventually going into a giant roller coaster train sounding dash forward, and this does damage to enemies. And if you press the jump button, you can also do a Shine Spark. With that said, Shine Spark is limited to going upwards or diagonally in any of the directions with the D-pad. We want to charge all the way through that ice wall to get our first E-Recovery tank in the game before going backwards for a missile tank. The E-Recovery tanks, what they do now, you might look in the top left and notice that my first energy tank in the set is now slightly outlined. Whenever I'm at critical HP, like I was a part or two ago in Pyrosphere, and I have to use concentration to heal, it'll now recover all the way through to that. So I will have 199 HP rather than just 99. There's not too many of them in the game, and honestly, their use is pretty limited. I'd say there's only, again, maybe 2 boss fights in the game that could ever really come in handy in, because save rooms are at such high amount in this game that taking a lot of damage from enemies feels very sparse. I feel what this game needed to do maybe to either increase the challenge factor or something along those lines is have it so that there are the navigation booths that save and heal, but then you'd have separate save and heal rooms throughout the areas, but just to make them feel more important. But again, it is a conflict of me thinking about this game as a Metroid, which it is marketed as, and without a doubt the character-wise it is. By the way, now the Fumble Eye is awake and will actively attack you. And also, it's not me approaching this as a very linear action game, like it is. Because I feel that's where a lot of the trepidation with this game comes into play is we're entirely approaching it as a Metroid game. And not to say we shouldn't approach something within a series as something in that series. For instance, Sticker Star and Color Splash are bad Paper Mario's gameplay-wise, even though Color Splash has some funny dialogue. Because they're just not fun RPGs or well-designed RPGs no matter what. Origami King is different, and even though I haven't played it yet, I know people don't like it as much, but at least it's a competent system, if that makes sense. Whereas Sticker Star and Color Splash, their combat feels extraneous to even go through and interact with in any regards. In that regard, this is an action game that has a Metroid skin, which there are games that do exploration and action right. I never finished the game, but Hollow Knight feels like that. They do a lot of combat in a non-linear section. I guess you could count The Messenger in that regard as well. I can't think of many super exploratory 3D action games, though. If there were many, they were probably mostly in the PS2 era, from my estimation. Like, even the games that were more exploration-based than others, like, say, if we count Onimusha as a trilogy as an action game, they're relatively exploratory, but they're not very linear. They're more Resident Evil type exploration than Metroid exploration. Which, yeah, there's a lot of back and forth, but in those games, your abilities aren't so much what unlock your pathways, it's just keys. Your abilities just help you in combat. And there is probably some better way to analyze the comparison between Metroid and Resident Evil-esque level design in terms of going this way than that way, all that sort of stuff. I don't think I'm the person to do that. I've barely watched the guy's videos, but that guy who did that series boss keys would probably be better at that than me. Also, I think this is maybe one of the only other fumble eyes in the game. In fact, I think this might be the only other fumble eye in the game. There's not too many of them. Again, in some regards, they treat enemies in this game less as enemies and more so as set pieces in some regards, because there's some that only show up in a certain area, and yeah, Metroid has done that since the start, like, the worms we saw back in, what was that, part 3 or 4 at this point? They were just enemies in Norfair in Super, and they weren't very remarkable. But for a 3D game, I feel you need to make your enemies more important, if that makes sense, because they're not just obstacles you put in the way, they're a part of the environment design in some regard, because you need to make them recognizable and have their patterns maybe just stick with you. A good example of what I mean by this is, in a Zelda game, for instance, different genre, I know, the enemies in every temple and dungeon feel unique, add to the atmosphere, and also have unique ways of being taken care of in some regards, even if it's just, this thing has a mask on it that you can take off with a hookshot. That means there's multiple ways you can approach fighting them. In other end, there's really not, and the combat does suffer for it. Like, action games can be repetitive and fun. I feel this game's combat is more so just repetitive, though. And as I brought up in, like, part 1 or 2, I feel part of that could have been solved by giving Samus some more form of melee attack, which Dread and Samus Returns did do. But the counter was more so for flashy stuff and making bosses less of an issue than actual, like, combo potential stuff. If anything, it's weird. This game is made by the Ninja Gaiden devs and is an action game that's just not fully cooked. Dread as a game feels like its bosses are more in line with what an action game would be like. Alright, so you want to Shine Spark across that pathway, but first you want to take care of something down here on the bottom of this floor. In the furthest south from the Mini-Master Collective vent, you can get an energy part. Cool? Cool. There is another item in this room, but we can't get that until we have another beam upgrade. It's one of the more... The Cryosphere is probably one of the most egregious examples of backtracking the game has. And, like, backtracking is normal for Metroid, of course. But with this game structured the way it is and how linear the pathways are, it really stands out when you have to do a major backtrack. Because it's not like the level design gets reinterpreted by your new ability set, or you can just smoothly progress through it as easily. You still have to do some of the platforming in it, and it's noticeable. Also, this particular enemy is something interesting to me. They cannot throw you off the ledge, I believe, and you can't get thrown, and you can't throw them off the ledge here. With that said, you can get knocked off it, so say if they like do that kick attack and you get flung off the edge, that will happen. It's mostly the unique throw animations that can't take you off ledges. Not that really comes into play often, but it's there. Whoa, hi there, buddy, get off my back. Yeah, like, see right there, I got kicked, and especially Sense Move does not send you off ledges, which I appreciate. I have a feeling they specifically coded it just for rooms like this where backtracking would have required going back into another room. In general, like, I think I said like part 1 or 2, the game is very good looking. The ice areas are probably the ones that have graphically aged the worst because the textures feel very flat, and they are. The character models in this game are still spectacular, though. Like, I'd say these rival some stuff on Switch stuff. That's partially because, in terms of resolution, not so much in terms of the hardware involved in it, the Wii to the Switch isn't as big of a jump as, say, the PS3 to the PS5. the SSD and some of the other stuff they're putting into there helps with that, admittedly. Like, I'm trying to think, even in terms of, like, hard drive space, I want to say, for instance, Dread isn't that much bigger of a game than Other M? Because I think Dread's, like, 2 gigabytes in that cartridge. Let me see if I can find a good data size on Other M real quick. Also, we got another Grognak here. It's the exact same thing. Alright, Other M is 8 gigabytes. Wow, Dread is 1/4 the data size. You know what? Actually, that's not too surprising now that I think about it, because this game not only has more voice acting, it has the FMVs. And Dread doesn't do FMVs. Almost every single cutscene in that game, if not every single cutscene, is in-engine. And hey, the FMVs look good. I'd say they're about comparable in terms of lighting to a Square FMV from the era. Like, what would have been the most recent Final Fantasy at the time, now that I think about it? Other M release date. This actually allowed me to answer that question a few parts ago if I can't remember if I was 12 or 13. August 31st. I would have been 13. Final Fantasy 13 release date. We'll go from there. 2009. And was the next year was 13 too. So yeah, this... I'd say the FMVs in this look about as good as FF13's. Lower res, but that's because this is the Wii versus the PS3 and 360, but that's just a technical comparison at that point. They probably could have rendered them at higher resolutions if this was a different console.
Maurice.
Another first-person segment. You gotta look at the lady in the window there, who's very much and tiny in the center. That was easily the worst of those on my first playthrough, because I distinctly remember I looked away from the screen when at the end of that cutscene happened and you first see her in the window, because I think, like, my mom called me to come down for dinner or something like that. And I left the room, and I came back, and I was like, well, what am I looking for now? And it's one of the easily the smallest instances of what you're looking for, barring maybe the Galactic Federation logo on the Space Pirate in the Biosphere Research Center. Can't destroy that door until later, so we're going to have to come all the way back here for a power-up later on. Welcome to the Material Storehouse. This is another room that comes to mind whenever I think of this game, just because, in a way, it oddly reminds me of Final Fantasy VII. And this entire next section, in a way, reminds me of FF7 Remake retroactively now, for reasons.
Don't come near me! I know why you're here!
Well, then you know more than I do, because I'm just here trying to answer a distress call. Are you in distress? Do you require assistance? You can destroy some boxes in here, but they're all more or less useless, barring one particular one.
No, you don't understand. I'm here to rescue you.
You're lying! I know the Galactic Federation wants to silence everyone who knows about our work here.
Okay, then. Interesting tidbit there. Why do you think that?
How can I trust you when your troops are willing to kill each other? Stay away from me.
Listen to me. We're here to rescue you. Hurry, this way! Wait. Get out of here!
next boss fight against the RB-176 Ferrocrusher. Yes, I'm looking in the Metroid wiki for that name. How in the hell would I have that memorized? This boss fight's very similar in how you approach it to the one in Pyrosphere, in that you're going to do a lot of ice beam charge shots while avoiding its admittedly surprisingly large attack pattern between firing lasers and trying to do rotation attacks at you. And every now and then you'll freeze a piece of its armor while using the charge shot. At that point, use a missile to take that piece of the mech off and reduce its health bar. Compared to the boss fight in the Pyrosphere, though, you do have more... It's a little harder to get the timing in to shoot the missiles in because its attack pattern's a lot faster. And the more damage you do, the less attacks it has, thankfully. With that said, this fight is going to change a little bit here in the second half coming up, in that once we take care of its arms, it's going to start relying on some other weapons. Namely, now it's going to try charging into you with both its front and back, although I believe compared to the back, the front, well, at least if you consider where the pilot... Yeah, the pilot is where the front is. I believe that is an active hitbox there, so don't walk into it. With that said, now you just need to target the wheels and do the same thing again and again. But, unlike the arms, we don't target the wheels, we instead target its weird little, I guess, EMP recharge box that tries to heat itself back up. You can get, I believe, 1 missile in per. I want to say you might be able to get 2 missiles in, but I think I might be imagining that because the timing just seems like you can. I find the second phase a lot easier than the first, and admittedly it's partially the intention because, well, look at it, you've literally disarmed it, so can't exactly do as much against you. Also, this thing's totally meant to slightly resemble the power suit from Aliens, right? It wouldn't be the first time this franchise has referenced Aliens. They've been doing that since Game 1, but this feels very poorly eluded. And sometimes it just forgets to move for some reason. I don't get why it did that. Either the AI was freaking out, or it's really having a bad time. I mean, hey, if you're driving that thing and you're losing your arms, you're probably trying to figure out what the hell you're doing anyway.
The woman believed that the Galactic Federation was sent to the bottle ship to keep those in the know from leaking information about the project. And no wonder. She'd been attacked by someone wearing a Galactic Federation power suit, and she implied that Maurice was killed by another soldier. Considering the mortal danger we'd survived together, I had to agree with her. There was a traitor among us.
Nobody made the joke.
The wavelength of that monster's cry is driving the other creatures into a frenzy. They've grown markedly more aggressive. It appears to be hiding in Sector 3 now. Take the elevator ahead of you to the main sector. From there, head to Sector 3. If you run into that thing, hit it with your plasma beam. You've got to take it down.
So could you unlock the plasma beam now, or do you only want us to do it when we absolutely have to? That ladder thing? Alright, sure, whatever. That boss fight, though, yeah, it's easy, but it's one that stuck with me. But now we can take a look over the room and see all the various boxes, and we want to missile the ones we can see at this particular conjecture, as one of them has an item. With that said, we can't grab this item for a hot minute. So if anything, I'm just putting it on the map so we can see exactly where it is for when we can grab it. With that, time for a very Metroid Fusion-like cutscene.
With those creatures, crafted into killers, running free, the bottle ship had been turned into a nightmare replica of Zebes. And then here came Adam and the others. At this rate, the plan the Federation wanted to keep so secret would be revealed. So they sent in an assassin. Someone to wipe out any survivors, as well as anyone who learned about the secret project. KG, James, Anthony, and Adam. Could one of them really be a traitor? Until I found out who it was, I decided to call the traitor the Deleter. On top of everything, I started to think about that woman. Was she the one who sent the distress signal? And could she be the person in charge here, Madeline Bergman? Either way, I knew I had to protect her. She would be targeted again. And she wasn't the only one in danger. I, too, would be considered a threat here.
Well, through that cutscene and to the prior ones, we definitely know the Deleter's not Anthony because of the different armor. And Adam, we know, is still back there. We know Maurice and Lyle are dead, so that means that's either KG or James. And if you pay attention to certain character design quirks, you already know who it is at this point. The Deleter, I'll get more into this as we go, but it's a really poorly handled plot element. I do not like it. It's really pointless in a lot of ways, but I'll go more into that as we go. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 10, I believe we're finishing off our trek through the cryosphere for now. See you guys then.